Hello and welcome to another video. In this video I want to talk about cottagecore and Romanticism and how they relate to each other. As you can probably already see, both of these aesthetics share a lot of similarities visually, but they also share a rather similar history. Right now we are all finding ourselves confined to our homes. Many of us are feeling trapped and are looking for an escape, which is where cottagecore comes in. The time during the Romantic era, despite being over 200 years ago, was kind of a precursor to today. Capitalism was on the rise, and many people were forced to work long hours in factories. So what I want to talk about in this video is how the rise of capitalism caused not only cottagecore to take off in the way it did, but also how it was the driving factor of the creation of Romanticism in the 18th and 19th centuries. Chapter 1. What is cottagecore? To start off, I want to give a little bit of info about cottagecore. For all of you who don't spend your every waking moment on the internet like I do, let me give you a short explanation on what it is. Basically, it's a social media aesthetic that was created around 2019-ish, but then became huge once the global pandemic hit. So what do I mean with social media aesthetic? On different social medias like Reddit, TikTok, Tumblr, and YouTube, there are certain aesthetics that have become quite popular in the last few years. A few examples of some of these aesthetics are Vaporwave, which is mostly a music style, but also an aesthetic based on 80s and 90s nostalgia. There's Dark Academia, which is based on academia as well as Gothic and Greek literature. And then we also have cottagecore. So cottagecore is based on a romanticized version of like the olden days and farm life or cottage life. There's a big emphasis on creating artisan goods, sewing, embroidering, etc. Basically, it's just a yearning to return to a more simple living. And this aesthetic is not just limited to imagery either. It's also a way of life for many people. You can dress cottagecore by wearing long, flowy dresses. You can embrace the lifestyle by spending time away from the computer and dedicating some time to handmade crafts. You can go outside and appreciate nature, maybe even have a picnic. Chapter 2. What is Romanticism? Romanticism was an art style that existed approximately between the years 1770 and 1850. It's mostly defined by its loose painting style and romanticized view of nature, but it also put a big emphasis on the person and their relation to nature. The artworks of the Romantic era talked a lot about the emotions of people instead of the strict logic that came from the time before. A common imagery in Romantic artworks is a single person in relation to nature. It can either showcase the idyllic calmness one can feel in nature, or the unexpected power nature holds, known as the sublime, which is a feeling of awe and terror. During this time, a lot of countries were going through a newly found sense of nationalism. The French, English, and American revolutions were happening during this time, but more about that later. And so the Romantic art featured a lot of nationalistic imagery, especially French Romanticism, but it also featured a lot of traditions and folklore and things that were inherently connected to the country they were living in. And people also started to put forward a romanticized version of the past. I also want to mention the Enlightenment, which is also known as the Age of Reason, which was a period of time during the early 1700s, right before Romanticism started. It was a time where a lot of scientific progress was being made, and they sought to reform society using the power of reason. Logic was put over emotion, and instead of alchemy and astrology, we got chemistry and astronomy. The art during this time obviously reflected this, and the art style at the time was known as Neoclassicism. Neoclassicism was very strict. It was very much about, logic, the old philosopher, ancient Greece. Romanticism was partially a reaction to all of this. The Romantics wanted to do away with the strict rules and order often found in classicism and during the Enlightenment, and they valued human emotion over logic, fluid color over strict lines. But like I mentioned earlier, this was also a time of war and revolution and drastic changes in society. Chapter 3. The political climate of the Romantic era. So the French Revolution lasted between the years 789. So the French Revolution lasted between the years 1789 to 1799. Ever since the beginning of the 1700s, there have been tensions rising in France. The population boomed. They went from 18 million at the beginning of the 1700s to 26 million at 1789. Which then led to huge numbers of unemployment and increases in food prices, which was caused by years of bad harvest. This revolution spurred the creation of probably the most recognizable artwork of the Romantic era, Liberty Leading Her People. There was also the American Revolution that took place between the years 1775 to 1783, in which America wanted to become free from the rule of Britain. And in Britain, there were a few events that happened during the 1600s that are known as the British Revolution. The first revolution between 1640 and 1660 put an end to the feudal system in England. Feudalism being the custom in medieval Europe in which the rich owns the land and rents it out to farmers in exchange for their labor, and instead replaced it with agrarian capitalism. The second happened in 1688 and basically changed how England was ruled and gave the monarchs less power and ultimately led to a higher rise of democracy in England. So, I mean, there are way too many things to cover in the revolutions to cover here, but my point is that there was a lot of political change in Europe and North America during this time. Also, these revolutions can be seen as bourgeois revolutions, and what that means is that they kind of basically paved the way for capitalism. I also just briefly want to mention the enclosure movement in England that took place in the 18th and 19th centuries, which was basically the removal of free land. The land had previously been free to use for whoever needed it, for example, grazing animals or growing food. But during this time, the land was divided up to become privately owned. The English government claimed that this would increase productivity, and the people who then owned the enclosed plot of land could then keep the profits to themselves. So because of this increased productivity, a lot of people were forced to move into the cities because they had lost their jobs farming, which then leads me to yet another revolution I want to mention, which is the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in 1760. During this time, there were many innovations that made labor way more effective, the spinning jenny and the power loom being two examples that made production of cloth way faster. So before this, there had been a bigger emphasis on, homemade artisan goods such as hand-woven fabrics. But these inventions led to a huge industrialization and more things started to become mass-produced. People then started to work more in factories, which in turn led to more and more people moving into the cities. The economy grew, the standards of living increased, however, only for the middle and upper class. The workers were forced to work long, excruciating hours in dangerous factory for little to no pay, and the crowded cities led to poor living situations, pollution, and a lack of clean drinking water. Chapter 4. Back to the art. I now just want to mention some artworks that encapsulates this feeling in Romanticism that I want to talk about. This is the Hay Wain by John Constable, and it features a rural landscape next to a cottage. A man is leading his carriage and horses through a small river and seems to just be going about his day. This area was actually owned by John Constable's father, so he would come here often and do paintings from real life. The man in the painting is not contemplating the bigger emotions in life, but He just seems to be a natural part of the landscape. Another painting is The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog by Caspar David Friedrich, and is another famous romantic painting. Unlike the Haywain, the man in this painting is obviously contemplating something. He is standing at the top of a mountain, looking over the vast sea of clouds. One starts to think about how he got up there, about what journey he had to take to reach the top, and what he is thinking about now that he is there. This painting encapsulates the thinking and emotion that Romanticism was about, but also the sublime being a feeling of awe mixed with terror. Chapter 5. Doesn't it sound familiar? So, what has been going on here lately?
The struggle continues. COVID hasn't gone away.
Well, the impact of the pandemic continues to affect jobs.
Jeff Bezos' achievement came at the expense of his workers.
5 million more joined the Millionaires Club.
Is that the average renter is in housing distress.
Burning hotter, faster, and more explosive than ever before.
The raging Delta variant isn't the only summer bummer out there. We're seeing ice quakes, fire tornadoes, and heat dome.
In today's world, the rich just keep getting richer and the poor is just getting poorer. An article by Forbes writes that America's billionaires have gotten $1.2 trillion richer since the start of the pandemic, whilst 20 million Americans have lost their jobs. In France, the super rich are now worth $95 billion more than they were a year ago, and Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, has gotten himself $67.5 billion richer in 2020, whilst his workers report horrible working conditions and the minimum wage has pretty much stayed the same since 1991. Mental health issues are also on the rise and have increased extremely much since the start of the pandemic. In the US, 4 in 10 adults have reported symptoms of anxiety and depression, compared to 1 in 10 in 2019. Young adults have been affected in a higher degree than others, as they are more likely to be working minimum wage jobs with low wages and poor working conditions. They have been affected more than any other group during the pandemic when it comes to loss of jobs and closure of schools and colleges. People aged 18 to 24 have reported a higher instance of anxiety and depression, 56% reporting these issues. These issues were on the rise way before the pandemic, and young people have been the victim of increased rent prices, high percentages of unemployment, a rise in mental health issues, as well as a stagnant minimum wage for years. So, cottagecore then acts as the perfect escape from the horrors of everyday life. Its emphasis on artisan goods such as homemade baked goods, sewing, embroidery, etc. takes our mind off the capitalist, mass-produced products of our time, and just like Romanticism, cottagecore creates a romanticized view of the past. Signs of human involvement is often present in cottagecore imagery such as fences, bridges, and clotheslines, and this makes us think about our own relationship with nature. It makes us think about our own individuality and our own emotions, again, just like Romanticism did. I also just want to bring up some specific photos that I found during my cottagecore research phase that I want to talk about them and kind of how they relate to the Romantic era. So this is an image I found, and it's just a woman reading a book, but she's not actively reading, she's looking out into nature. Her facial expression makes us think that she's thinking about something. So she's kind of lost in thought, or maybe lost in her emotions, and the way the grass seems to almost devour both her and the bike makes her feel like part of nature itself. This image reminds me of artworks by Dutch artist Henriette Ronner Knip, who made quaint paintings of cats during the Romanticism. It just showcases the idyllic life that many people yearned for back then and today. And then I also want to mention this image I found. I talked briefly about the sublime during my talk about what Romanticism was, which was basically just a word for the feeling of awe and fear mixed in one. This theme was very common during Romanticism, and I can almost get a sense for it in this image too. The door is opening up to reveal a vast landscape outside, but the viewer is still looking at it from the inside, maybe afraid to go out. The landscape looks massive from here, and it's beautiful, but doesn't it also look just a little bit frightening? Again, these kinds of imagery wants to talk about how grandiose and amazing nature is, which I'm also getting a feel for in cottagecore. You almost have two kind of feelings. You either have the small, quaint lifestyle and also this huge appreciation for nature and landscapes, just like they did in the Romantic era. Chapter 6, Conclusion. So what can we learn from all of this? I don't know, but isn't it neat how history just seems to repeat itself? How we're all trapped in a cycle of endless capitalism where the rich get richer and the poor have to slave away at minimum wage, barely making enough money to support oneself, and the only solace we can find is imagery of a simpler yet unobtainable life. No, but seriously, I want to end this video with talking about how the emotions we are feeling right now are the same emotions that people struggled with hundreds of years ago. No matter how far we are advancing in technology, medicine, and everything else, we are still the same as then. We still want the same things and feel the same emotions. No matter where we come from, even if that is on the other side of the planet or 200 years in the past, we are all just humans with human emotions, and I think there's a kind of beauty in that. And that, my friends, is the end of this video. I truly hope you enjoyed my take on Romanticism and cottagecore, and please do give this video a like if you did, and subscribe if you want to see more. And I will see you again next time. Bye!